This is a set of pork spare ribs. There's actually 3 different sets of ribs in this package. Now, pork spare ribs and pork back ribs are actually the same ribs. It's just that the back rib portion of these pork spare ribs has been removed, and we will talk about those at a later time. But just so you know, they're the same ribs. Back ribs and spare ribs are the same ribs. It's just a different portion of the ribs that we use for back ribs and spare ribs. A lot of times they come 3 to a package like this. Sometimes there's only 1, but most of the packers would use 3 sets of spare ribs in the same package. If you notice, this is the breastbone or sternum on this portion of the rib, on the smaller portion or the smaller ribs down here. So it runs back to about here. Rib bones actually go down, and then from the ribs that are at the furthest toward the back of the animal to the front are somewhat connected by a group of cartilage along the edge of the ribs. And so once the sternum starts, there is still some cartilage in between each rib and the sternum bones themselves, which allows those to either be cut off or to remain if we've got a whole set of spare ribs. Now, spare ribs also have over the top of them most of the time the diaphragm muscle that sits right up over here. So that's the diaphragm. In beef, if we were using that, that would be skirt steak most of the time, and but we leave it on a lot of the spare ribs because it's smaller. It would be hard to utilize a lot of those for skirt steaks. It actually has some connective tissue over it, but animals are so young, the pork's so young, that I don't usually worry about anything with those muscles themselves. Okay? We could cook this just like it is and utilize this whole piece in the barbecue for spare ribs, or we can remove, which will make it easier, because if you remember, we have cartilage along the edge of the ribs, then we have the sternum here. So if I'm going to use a knife and start cutting across and cutting between the ribs, I'm going to have sternum in the way. So if I really want to make this easy and make the rib shape more uniform, and the whole thing as I start to cut it, I can do that even with a knife by cutting through the edge of that cartilage to make these more uniformly shaped or in length, which will make them cook more uniformly as well. So what we may want to do then, if you want to make these very uniform in the way you're cutting or cooking, you could even take this skirt muscle off. A lot of times it actually goes to some markets in Japan if they take it off back at the plant. Can be utilized in several different products, anything that you're cooking, beans or whatever. And then to make St. Louis style spare ribs out of a full set of spare ribs, I'm using a knife that's a little thicker, that's a little heavier. To remove that sternum, which a lot of times you'll see these actually sold as brisket bones, pork brisket bones. They're fairly bony, but there's a lot of flavor in there.